After more than a year of plea deals and sentences given down, a suspect in the Harvest Homecoming shooting is going to trial. We thank you for joining us for Wave News at 6. I'm Jose Sosaya.
And I'm Myra Ansari. A panel of jurors has been selected and sworn in for the murder trial for Isaiah Page, who is accused of shooting and killing Bryce Gerlach at the festival.
Now, we know 12 other people have been sentenced in connection to the shooting. Wave News reporter Logan Perrone joining us live for New Albany tonight again. And Logan, what more from prosecutors and defense did we hear today?
Well, we heard from them from the auxiliary courtroom. We heard from both the prosecution and the defense as they gave many opening statements, previews of what they plan to argue as this trial moves forward. With the first murder trial in the deadly 2024 Harvest Homecoming shooting set to begin, a panel of 15 jurors was sworn in on Wednesday. They will decide whether to convict 19-year-old Isaiah Page with murder in the shooting death of 18-year-old Bryce Gerlach. As the panel was finalized, both the prosecution and defense laid out previews of their cases. Floyd County Prosecutor Chris Lane told the panel their argument will showcase that the evidence points to Page being guilty of murder, even if Gerlach was not who he meant to shoot. Lane also told jurors they will prove there was a gang affiliation through media, notes, and testimony, including from people who were with Page the night of the shooting. 4 other defendants in this shooting took plea deals requiring them to testify in any trials related to it. Co-defense attorney Coy Travis previewed his case, starting by saying silence speaks volumes. Page's defense team told the panel they will argue about gaps in the evidence, leaving questions unanswered. They plan to argue there is not enough evidence to convict Page of murder. After 3 days of jury selection, the final 3 jurors were seated Wednesday. During dismissal and attorney strikes, microphones allowing us to listen in the auxiliary room were muted, leaving it unclear if the prosecution, defense, or Judge Carrie Stiller removed potential jurors from the panel and for what reason. As the jurors were dismissed, we counted 12 men and 3 women, nearly all of them white. Opening statements are scheduled for 9 a.m. The prosecution will then present its case. They plan to start with 2 to 3 witnesses, including the first officer who responded to the shooting. Now, after the jury dismissed on Wednesday, we heard a little more from the prosecution, the defense, and Judge Stiller. They were talking about transfer of intent, and what that essentially is a legal theory that could come up here where a defendant would be liable for harming someone even if that's not the person they intended to harm. We're live in New Albany tonight. Logan Perrone, Wave.